member from Oshawa.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I am pleased to be able to stand in this House on behalf of the constituents in Oshawa and broadly across Durham Region that I hear from regularly. And here we are today talking about Bill 79, which the government has presented as called Working with Workers Act. No, Working for Workers Act. We're the ones...
Order?
To interrupt this very important debate, I just wanted to welcome a very special guest to the gallery today. We have the Minister of Health from the Republic of Poland visiting, and I just wanted to welcome him to Queen's Park.
Thank you. Resume debate.
As I was saying.
Thank you, Speaker. And I am, again, pleased to take my place on behalf of the people of Oshawa and speak to the Working for Workers Act. This is a bill that has a few pieces. It has a lot of announcements that have gone with it, and as I will get into, a lot of those announcements sound awfully good, but they're not within the pages of this bill. They're not actually in statute in this legislation. So we'll get to that, but the meat and potatoes in this bill, unfortunately, there are lots of opportunities that are missed. And this is working for workers, but if they were actually working with workers, year-round, there would be a lot more in this bill. And that's just, I'll start with, there's a bit of disappointment there because, of course, we're all hearing from constituents, from workers across communities, about improvements to their workplaces in terms of safety, that they're hearing about the need for paid sick days. They're hearing from community members about the improvements needed in training. And again, we're missing things from this bill. So the Ontario Federation of Labour, Speaker, has been a wonderful voice for workers across this province, and they have a new campaign that says enough is enough. And this government is hearing that a lot from folks, that they've had it up to here, that they are fed up. This campaign has 5 demands that we're hoping the government will really listen to, understand, and that we might see in the budget some of their needs addressed. Real wage increases, investing in schools and health care and keeping them public. Affordable groceries, gas, and basic goods. I mean, the cost of living is just going up and up and up and up. And workers are part of that group that have to pay, and they're not supported. We want to see rent control and affordable housing, making banks and corporations pay their fair share. There's a whole bunch that goes into creating that kind of ecosystem where workers can thrive. And so I would encourage the government to spend more time working with workers as they're developing their legislation, because there are some missed opportunities. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to speak about the need for anti-scab legislation. So talking about replacement workers, we have for a long time, since the original Mike Harris years, when they got rid of anti-scab legislation real quick, we've been fighting for it to come back in this province. When both parties are bargaining in good faith, agreements are reached without further job action. And so this government and previous Conservative governments who have allowed the use of replacement workers, that doesn't serve anyone. It can be quite unsafe, but it's not in good faith, and it really does extend these strikes. And strikes are one of the only options that workers have to balance the scales. When it comes to that power dynamic with them and the employer, and it applies economic pressure. And I think the government can appreciate that there is an imbalance when it comes to workers and employers. So when an employer brings in replacement workers, that is in bad faith. And we saw that not too long ago in North Oshawa. There was a strike outside of the campus. It was a private contracted company that brought in replacement workers. And so the custodial staff, the janitorial staff, were out on the lines, and as they explained to me, they were having to use Google Translate with the replacement workers who were being dropped off in vans and running in between the townhouses to get to work. And they were using Google Translate with them to try and warn them about some of the chemicals in the level 2 labs, that they were trying to talk to them about training. They were trying to keep these replacement workers safe, and also telling them, stop getting in there, you know, that this is our job. And it was ugly, and it was not right. And this government allows that to happen. And I raise these issues because this is a bill in front of us that says working for workers. Well, the government has an opportunity to undo the harm that was done by, the Harris government that came in and did away with the anti-scab legislation, and could bring it back in, could be responsible to workers who could make that change. And Speaker, because it's not in this bill, I know that my colleagues and I are looking forward to making sure that that gets done. We're going to continue to raise that issue in this House through legislation until this government steps up and is a better version of itself. Speaker, something else I want to talk about in this bill, about this bill. There is a need for paid sick days in the province of Ontario.
Yeah. Yes.
We have champions on this side, none other than the illustrious member from London West, who time after time after time has introduced legislation and has fought tirelessly for paid sick days in the province of Ontario. This government hears it, and they know it, and they're hearing it from people in their community. And we're still getting emails from folks. People all over the place are saying that they and their families are getting sick more often. It's taking longer to get better. And if these people can't stay home when they are sick, they're going to spread that sickness to people in their community of work, in their families. That is not how we keep this province well. Often when we talk about medically vulnerable or folks with disabilities, it's usually within the context of healthcare settings, if we're talking about the need for paid sick days. But many of these people who are medically vulnerable are also workers, and they're even more impacted when their coworkers come in sick. And this is a government that keeps talking about folks with disabilities getting into the workplace. But the very least they could do is to take steps to ensure that workplaces are actually accessible, and places where people who may already be medically compromised, where they can stay well. Earlier in this pandemic, we were also calling for indoor air quality standards and upgrades to HVAC systems to make safer workplaces, and guess what? It never materialized. And improved air quality will go a long way to stopping the spread of airborne illness, resulting in fewer people needing to take time off for being sick. So what better way to work for workers than by keeping their working conditions safe?
Exactly.
Here's an email from Corwin in Oshawa, who has said that they support the Stay Home If You Are Sick Act. And they had written, quote, "We need 10 permanent paid sick days plus 14 days during public health emergencies. The worker income protection benefit is inadequate in that it provides a meager 3 days over a 700-plus day period. Health workers and public health experts have been clear that paid sick days curb infection, increase vaccination rates, and reduce visits to the emergency room. 10 permanent paid sick days would ensure workers and their families have access to preventative care instead of relying on emergency departments." They go on to say, "Denying workers permanent and adequate paid sick days goes against public health advice to stay home if sick. The reality is that most workers can't afford to stay at home without pay, especially now, with inflation at an all-time high. Losing a day's wage to recover from the flu could mean not being able to pay grocery bills." And that's from Corwin in Oshawa. This is a bill that says that it is working for workers, but it is, again, not taking the opportunity to keep workers safe in their workplaces in a way that has been brought to their attention multiple times with experts and healthcare folks making the case So I don't understand why the government, again, has missed this opportunity to keep people well. Speaker, Bill 124 is something that we talk about a lot in this space. And probably if we were to go to the average, convenience store or talk to our community members, they might not know what Bill 124 is. But they all, outside of this space, they know that nurses are not being treated fairly. They may not understand the ins and outs of it or be familiar with the legislation or this government's stubborn refusal to back down on Bill 124, even though it has been ruled unconstitutional. They're appealing it and fighting nurses in court. But it's nurses and healthcare workers whose wages are being suppressed by this bill. There is not a competitive wage that a hospital can offer its own employees. Instead, the hospital is being forced to go to private agencies who will charge the hospital exorbitant amounts and pay the nurses more than they would make at the hospital. I mean, still, their agencies are keeping a lot of that money for themselves. And the hospitals are essentially held hostage. So they need staffing, they need nurses. And when they don't have enough of their own because nurses are leaving in droves, and they're going to these agencies, they're going to Alberta. This is a government that says you're not allowed to pay them anymore. We're going to keep our foot on your head, and you're not allowed to. We're going to keep those wages suppressed. But we're going to allow agencies to charge whatever the heck they want because I don't know why. Competition. And that is unbelievable. But it's creating this crisis. It's creating a circumstance where I think ultimately it's union busting at its finest. At its core, this is union busting because as these nurses and folks who are unable to earn a fair wage because of Bill 124 are going to these private agencies, they are leaving unionized workplaces with benefits and pensions. They may be early in their career that pension benefits may not be at the forefront of their planning right now, but they are leaving unionized work environments to go somewhere where they might make more money now and have different flexibility for scheduling, as we're hearing, but they're ultimately not protected. So this Bill 124 is, I think, at its heart, a union-busting initiative. And anyone who's listening over there is kind of looking at me like, come on. Seems a bit far-fetched. Does it? I don't think it does. Because we are seeing this happening in hospitals, and hospitals are losing the staff that they need. Here's an email from Wendy, and part of her email is, Ontario desperately needs more nurses and health professionals to provide high-quality and timely care in our public hospitals. But every day they face impossible working conditions that have only worsened during the pandemic, and their wages and basic rights have repeatedly been attacked with legislation like Bill 124. This is leading more nurses to leave their jobs and even the profession. She goes on to say, I support the nurses' demands for safe staffing, better pay, better working conditions. Investing in nurses and health professionals is the best way to improve access to timely, safe and quality hospital care. Unless you act now, we'll continue to see nurses leaving the profession, leading to worse nurse-to-patient ratios and a lower quality of care. This is unacceptable. And that's from Wendy. People understand what is happening, that this is a created crisis of this government's making. And they could reverse course, but they won't. But, Speaker, Bill 124 is not only about nurses. It's about many folks in the public sector. As the transportation critic for the NDP, it has been my privilege to hear from many folks doing important work across the province. One such group, OPSU Local 428 members who work on the Glenora and Wolfe Island ferries for the Ministry of Transportation. I met with these folks a while back. I know that our labour critic is talking with them. They are facing a serious understaffing issue, which has caused reductions and cancellations of services on both of the ferries. And again, this is because of Bill 124. So because of Bill 124, which artificially suppresses their wages, well, not artificially, it's forcing them to be stuck at this level and not able to bargain increased wages. But because of that, they can't recruit and retain ferry operators. They can't bring in ferry workers because the broader world pays something that is fair, right? So the Ministry of Transportation knows this. And they have actually been bringing in agency workers from out of province and they're not willing to pay them more than this 1% increase, right? Like they won't, this government will not allow them to be paid more, but they are willing to write a check to agencies in other provinces where we're paying the transportation cost to bring them in, a daily stipend, and accommodation in addition to their wages. So at some point, that's going to become more expensive than just paying them what they are worth. But again, stubbornly refuses to change course. This has been an issue, certainly, that the ferry workers have raised, the conservation officers have raised, nurses have raised, just about everywhere you look in the public sector has raised the fact that they are not paid what they are worth and they're not able to fairly and collectively bargain fair wages. And here we are debating a bill that says working for workers. And I have to think, what are they doing that is benefiting workers? Speaker, all of us had the opportunity recently to meet with the corrections officers, to meet with the probation and parole officers, that they came to Queen's Park, as they have been doing for years, and had their morning breakfast to go over a host of issues. And some, they are having significant recruitment and retention issues across all of their frontline positions. And when you don't have adequate staffing in jails, when you don't have adequate staffing in probation and parole offices, you have dangerous circumstances for the workers, for the inmates, for everybody involved. And that is not what anybody wants. It is not good for recidivism. It is not good for anyone who is doing the job. But the corrections folks came and asked for support for mental health. They asked for improved training. They asked for more permanent full-time staff. More officers means fewer lockdowns and less violence. More probation parole officers and staff means better supervision and support, less recidivism, safer communities. They came and talked about the canine unit, which is very important when it comes to keeping the workplaces safe in terms of managing or dealing with the drugs in institutions. Speaker, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's their understanding and my understanding that that canine unit pilot project is the longest-running pilot project in the history of Ontario.
It's not a pilot anymore.
So when it's been, I think, 9 years, at what point does it become permanent? At what point does the government say, yes, this is worth continuing, we will invest in that? That could have been in this bill, maybe next year, right? This is about working for workers, and one of the things that this government does is announces new hires, right? And corrections is no exception. But new hires that are not full-time permanent and are backfill, so that if a corrections officer is away, that person may or may not be called, it's not adding to the complement on the floor. It's not adding to the support in the facility, in the jail. So it's spinning numbers about, look at all the new hires, but those new hires are not more people in the workplace. They're more part-time folks waiting by the phone wondering if they're going to get called. They're more part-time people who are afraid to rock the boat because they are glad to have some kind of employment, but they don't have the benefits. They're not full-time permanent. So again, this is a chance where the government could improve this legislation and make safer workplaces This is in terms of corrections, but broadly across the province. Speaker, I have been very proud of the work that I have done as the Community Safety and Correctional Services critic years ago. And some of the work that I had done was to, on behalf of firefighters, to keep them safe out in the community, to do right by them when they are hurt, when they are sick. And the government has made a commitment about adding thyroid and pancreatic cancers to the list. We were hoping we would see that in this bill. I would ask the government to clarify that, and hopefully we will see it added. Thank you.
Questions? The member from Cornhill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To your point, and thank you for the opposition's statement. Like many of us in the House, I'm privileged to have some very hard-working and dedicated firefighters in my riding. And firefighters die of cancer at a rate 4 times higher than the general population. On average, 50 to 60 firefighters die of cancer yearly in Canada, and half of those are from Ontario. Will the member please support our proposal to expand WSIB to expand presumptive coverage? Thank you.
Response, the member from Oshawa.
During my time as a critic for Community Safety and Correctional Services, I worked alongside firefighters to make a number of changes, and changes that ensured survivor benefits would be protected when their partners die from occupational disease. That was originally called Bill 98, and the government of the day took that, put it into government legislation, and fixed that problem. I've been working with them since the beginning, since I was first elected. Right now, we recognize 17 cancers connected to the work of being a firefighter. Pancreatic and thyroid have yet to be added formally. We were hoping to see it in this bill. The government announcements and whatnot, that's good. We hope they'll follow through in that. Of course, we support that. But again, it's reassuring when we see it in writing, and until that happens, I will not only support it, I will continue to chase it. Thank you.
Question, the member from Kiiwetamo.
Miigwech to the member from Oshawa. In Sulika, prior to 1997, we had 2 hospitals in Sulika for 5,000 people. We had the Federal Hospital for Indians, and we had a provincial hospital for, white people. And then we amalgamated. Now we have a provincial hospital. And I share that because the member spoke about Bill 124. It seems the healthcare system has not improved. And I remember being involved in the healthcare sector. We were paying for agency nurses at a rate of $1,200 to $1,500 per day. And when we hire agency nurses, it has an impact on the wellness.
Question?
The wellness of the people that are being served. What would, including removing Bill 124, how would it improve the health and the lives of people?
Response, the member from Oshawa.
Thank you. And as my colleagues have shared from their time on Finance Committee, where they were hearing over and over from those who are fighting against Bill 124 because they are doing important work in healthcare or in our public sector, they feel demoralized, they feel disrespected, humiliated, I think is what they have said. If the government were to relent, if the government were to acknowledge that this has been ruled unconstitutional and to stop fighting nurses in court, I think morale would also improve among those who are fleeing the province to work in healthcare elsewhere. But also, we need to be able to recruit and retain. We need to be able to keep staffing, we need to be able to get staffing levels to the place where healthcare can be best provided, safe levels, and we're not there right now. So I think that is a huge thing. Anyone in healthcare has told us that. Everyone in healthcare has told us that. They've told this government as well. I'm sorry that they're not listening.
Response. Turn the member from Newmarket, Aurora.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you to the member of Oshawa for her speech this afternoon. This bill, 79, it does propose changes to support the rollout of our employment service transformation. and Ontario is expanding its new employment services to 5 more regions, being London, Windsor-Sarnia, Kitchener-Waterloo, Barrie, Durham, and Ottawa. And this is helping more people move towards meaningful and purpose-driven careers close to home. So I'd like to ask the member, because I believe Oshawa is in Durham, don't you agree that we should be doing everything we can to help those on social assistance, including in your area of Durham, find meaningful work?
Response to member from Oshawa.
Yeah, that sounds great. What page is that on? So I am glad to have investment in Oshawa and in Durham region to help people find meaningful work. I am glad to know that we're on the government's radar, frankly. But I don't know where it is in this legislation. So again, to what I had said earlier, this government has been making announcements about positive things that we support that would make a difference in communities. But we're not seeing in the statute. We're not seeing it physically in Bill 79, the Working for Workers Act. So I would be very glad to meet with that member and have a better understanding of the specifics, because I'm happy to get on side with workers in my community. I just don't know what that looks like because I haven't seen it. Thank you.
Further question, the member from London North Centre.
I'd like to thank the member from Oshawa for her comments, and I know that she's a member who stands with workers in thought, word, and in deed. But I wondered if the member could take us back in time to a time when Oshawa GM was under threat, a time when the Premier actually said, after meeting with GM executives, he said, and I quote, "They told me straight up there's nothing we can do," as if taking his orders from somebody else, and the ship has already left the dock. But at that time, speaking of the title of this bill, Working for Workers, I would like the member to describe how Oshawa workers stood up for workers when this government rolled over and turned their back on workers.
Response, the member from Oshawa.
That was a really tough time, and it is still pretty raw for folks in our community. The government in that moment abandoned us as General Motors appeared to have been abandoning us. The fact that we are able to stand here years later and be in a very different position moving forward, we are all extremely grateful. The fact that the government maybe realized that there was hope after all and was a partner in that, we are glad. But the government still has never acknowledged that the reason that General Motors has turned their attention back to Oshawa and that plant is because they build awesome product, and they always have. That the collective bargaining teams, that the local 222, Unifor auto workers, and all the parts suppliers, they do good work, and they deserve to be respected. At the time, they were just kind of discounted, and I think what we really see is that when you have fantastic workers and pride in what they do, you can build excellent products. And that is to the workers' credit. Thank you.
Further question, the member from Mississauga-Malton.
Thank you to the member from Oshawa for your remarks. Madam Speaker, member from Oshawa was talking about the announcement. So she talked about, I'm guessing, about what our government is doing for job protected leave for military reservists, expanding cancer coverage for firefighters, enhancing fines to protect workers, cleaner washroom on construction sites, removing work protection, and making sure preparing the student for skilled trade jobs, and helping the newcomers. So my question to the member opposite is very simple. Do you support these initiatives taken by the government to support our workers? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Response, the member from Oshawa.
So he gave us a list of promises. We've seen what this government does with promises. So I'm hopeful that that some of that will happen. The fact it isn't in the bill is what concerns us. We heard a minister's question and response earlier this morning about the washrooms being better for the gendered washrooms and clean. It's not in the bill. So this just trust us, it'll be in regulation. A lot has to happen from that announcement to actually happening. Is that in regulation? It's not in statute. So if things matter to this government, I would imagine that they would put it in the bill. So I guess my answer to the member across is I will cross my fingers, we'll see, and I'll support good ideas if and when they happen. Thank you.
Further debate?